In this episode, I'm going to show you the 5 steps that I use to simplify the process of creating cities in my Homebrewed campaign. The cities and settlements of your world provide an anchor for your player characters, a place they grew up, relationships that they formed, and they also give them ideas to move out into the greater world. But it can seem daunting. But I have developed these techniques to make it simple so that you can create cities that are interesting and dynamic and seem real to your players. So let's build a city! Hello again, I'm KR King. This is my YouTube channel dedicated to homebrewing a D&D campaign. In earlier episodes, I did the origin story of my world. I created a map with some settlements. I created my first major NPC, Zodi the Tavern Keeper, that all the player characters are going to interact with when they meet up. But now I want to populate the settlements. I want to create a sort of social order, who's who in the cities. This is part of the world building. Now, what's daunting about world building for a lot of people trying to create a homebrewed campaign is world building. It just seems like it's a task that's almost endless. You have to create populations of cities and governments and who did what and what their family relations are and histories. And it seems like it's too much. But in fact, it's not too much. Because what you're going to concentrate on is what's the relationship of your player characters to the personages of your cities and towns. And that's what you have to worry about initially. And so you always remember this organic process. The player characters are interacting with your world. You're not creating a novel or a screenplay or something in which you need to know every character and all their relationships. You're putting out a framework for the players to interact with, and then as they grow in power and influence, they get to know people higher up the chain, and they get to understand more about who these people are, what their characteristics and powers are. So we're always going to remember that when we're creating our cities and settlements at the beginning. So I'm going to detail these 5 steps in this episode, and then in the next one, I'm going to apply them to the cities that I created on my map in the 3rd episode. So the first step I always take in creating a city or a town is to think about the ethos of the place. What is the spirit of this place? What drives people? What gets them up every day? Do you have a town in which pure survival is the ethos? Finding shelter, protection from the elements and monsters and whatnot? Is it a very sophisticated society where people are striving to get wealthier or to find fame? What is it that's driving and motivating people on a daily basis? Now, this can change, as I say, from city to city, but also there's an overriding ethos often to a place, to the continent. And this is going to filter down into how they form the cities, where they live, who runs them, how people operate in terms of trade, in terms of religion, in terms of all sorts of things. And then there's a larger consideration of your world in terms of gameplay. Is it a heroic fantasy world like Tolkien, in which good and evil are very clearly marked? Settlements and cities often reflect that good and evil. You have individuals that do things, act badly depending on the circumstances, but basically they're good-hearted. Or do you have sort of a Game of Thrones world in which most of the people are operating in a kind of Machiavellian way? The values are very relative in many ways. We have good characters and we see them struggle against this, but generally speaking, the worldview is people go for power above all else. They go for wealth. And again, we see again and again in that world how the dark forces kind of run things. You have to make that decision at the beginning. Once you have this general ethos, you can apply this to the individual ethos of cities and towns, but it's going to reflect that overall. The next thing that I'm going to do is create what everybody knows. And by everybody, I really mean your player characters. What do they know about these cities and towns just growing up there? This is my Wikipedia page. So if you think of a Wikipedia entry, what does it tell you when you look up a city or town? It tells you where it's located, probably when it was founded, how many people live there, what is the economic basis for this town? There's always some reason it's there, whether it's on a coast, it's a port, whether it's near some natural resource, it becomes a manufacturing center, whatever. It has to have some reason for people to live there, otherwise they'll move away and the city will die. And we see that in terms of the historical progress of cities. We also know what sort of people live there. What's the demographics of the city? How many people? Who are they? What makes up the population? We also see who rules the city and how it's ruled. What's the government structure? And then often we see notable people that are either living in the city or are from the city. So we're going to go down this list when we create our cities. And again, this is a very general thing. You don't have to go into the, gross national product and figure out how much money is here or there, or the gold supplies or whatever. You're just giving a general idea, because the players aren't going to know that. The player characters, they're first level characters. They have a sense of this. They have a Wikipedia, very basic idea of what these cities are. They don't know the details. And so you don't have to come up with them right away. The next thing we're going to detail when you're creating the personages, the people that run the town or the richest people or whatever, you got to remember the higher up you go, the less detail you need. And this is really important. And the reason we're saying that is because we're doing this in relation to our player characters, who are going to be low level when they start off. So they're not going to know the king or the richest guy in town. They're going to know people that they grew up with or in the tavern, the other adventurers. And that's who we're going to create in more detail. But we want to know who these people are, but we don't have to create as much detail. And always think about your own situation in life. We may know who our governor or state senator is, but we've never met them. We don't interact with them. Now, player characters will eventually interact with these people as they gain in renown and level. They become special people. They become people who are the driving force of the world. This is part of our suspension of disbelief. But certainly starting off, even if your player character wants to be the son or daughter of the king or something, again, if people want to do that, when we're going to talk about this when we get into players, how they decide their background, you can modify that to make it realistic that they're at Zodi's Tavern with the other player characters who have much more modest backgrounds. So even though they know about these people, they're not necessarily interacting with them. They're not socializing. They're not friends necessarily. They just know this. Their sphere of influence is going to be much closer, and they're going to give you ideas when they create their background about who those people are. But right now, we're just trying to give everybody a sense of the world that they're in. We're trying to immerse them in this world. We're trying to make this seem real, just like our world is real. We know who's running the show. We know who the rich people are and the famous people and the warriors and all this, but we aren't necessarily interacting with them. The next thing, once you've created these people in these towns, is you want to create allies and enemies. You want to figure out what are the relationships between the various individuals and families and guilds and whatnot within each of these towns. Allies and enemies, alliances and rivalries really give your world kind of a richness, kind of a realism. And then these alliances and enemies will filter down to the players because they are going to know certain members of these groups, and they're going to have their own alliances and enemies based on their family background. A friend that has turned to a bad person. You still have that friendship. You're a rival, but you're not quite a nemesis. And then the ones that are true nemesis. And this has a history to it. So the players are going to know the structure of cities and the alliances and rivalries that exist, and they're going to fit in somehow in terms of their background. They'll give you their background. If you've got a good system of alliances and rivalries of enemies and allies lined up in the starting city, you can fit them in more easily, and it makes them feel part of this place. They did grow up here because you have this richness, and that's why you want to consider this in your world. All right, so there are the 5 steps that I take in a general sense. In the next episode, I'm going to apply them to the various cities that I've created on my map for my world Melanor that I'm creating in terms of my homebrew campaign example. If you've liked anything that you've seen, please subscribe. Please make comments. Tell me what you liked. Tell me what you didn't like. I want to keep making these. I want to go towards what viewers want to see as I create this world. So in the meantime, keep playing D&D and tell somebody else about it.